What's up guys, Intelitech Studios here. Now you may be wondering, why am I taking apart this Hoover cyclone assembly? Well, the answer is very simple. This is in a response to another YouTuber who made a video that is titled, "Never Clean Out Your Cyclone." Now the video was targeted specifically for Dyson users. It said, "Never clean out your Dyson cyclone." But the points that he brought up, and the points that I'll be bringing up, are the same for any bagless vacuum in the industry. So this cyclone assembly came off of a Hoover Elite Rewind Plus. It's a machine that you can still get in stores. It's still a current model that you can get. This is not a significantly old machine. This is a machine that has been made in the last couple years and still has a decent amount of life left into it. This machine has a very, very, very bad smell. The reason is they sucked up water into the cyclone assembly. This filter, whenever I first got it, was in the exact state that it is now after I've washed it moisture-wise, where this has a ton of moisture in the filter. Now you might be thinking, well, someone clearly sucked up water in their vacuum and didn't take good care of it. That's true. Thankfully, this filter stopped it. But the cyclone pack itself did not. This system did not actively stop this from going through. As you can see, that's why we're taking apart the entire cyclone assembly. This is obviously dual cyclonic. You can see there's the entire assembly right here. Now the reason we need to take this completely apart is because we need to wash it. Now one thing that was mentioned in that video is that you should never ever wash the inside of a cyclone assembly, saying that this is bad. Running water inside of a cyclone assembly is a bad idea. This is clearly a bad idea, right? Well, no. I will demonstrate that now. Now this is just a rinse, but I will let all these parts soak overnight. Now, why do you need to do this sometimes? Now, first off, that video in question, it mentions how you should never clean these out, and that is simply false. There's no way of getting around it. That is simply not true. There is no method of scientific supposed evidence that would prove otherwise. Because that person's response to many of the commenters is, well, where's your evidence? Which is really stupid whenever you're talking about a real-world scenario where you had a vacuum cleaner that has a significant smell coming from the cyclone assembly, and then you wash it, and you let it dry, and you put it back together, and you come to the logical conclusion that the smell is gone, therefore you cleaning the cyclone assembly got rid of the smell, and then being told that somehow you're stupid, and you don't know what you're talking about, and that you are simply not intelligent. That is not how you deal with people in a professional environment. In a professional industry where you're actually talking about servicing actual appliances that people use on a day-to-day basis, this isn't theory, this isn't rocket surgery, this isn't rocket science, this isn't any sort of speculation nonsense. It's incredibly as simple as you test it, did it work, then it affected it. We're not talking about a Nintendo game where you blew into the cartridge and stuck it back into the console and it played, and you don't know if the cause of the system working again was because that you actually blew the dust off or because you simply reseated the cartridge. We're not talking about that. Now sure, if you wash the filter and the cyclone assembly and all the hoses and the smell goes away, then I think it's fair to say that if when you pulled out this cyclone assembly, you noticed no smell coming from it, that therefore washing out the cyclone assembly didn't in of itself get rid of the smell. That's a fair point. However, when you pull out a cyclone assembly like this, and you can obviously tell that there is a very strong odor coming from it, and it's the only part that you're holding, and it's the only part of the vacuum that is near you, therefore could only be the part that is releasing a smell, then logic would tell you that that is what is happening, that this particular piece of the appliance is in some way creating a foul odor. And the only way to get rid of that is to wash it. Now, the point that was made in that video about how you shouldn't wash it at all is obviously bullshit. However, the part that I think they're trying to say, that the part that they're still getting across that is a good point, is that you should wash it properly, which they did not say that. They said never wash it out, which is not true. Obviously, if you've narrowed the issue down to being the cyclone assembly, then washing out the cyclone assembly is your only option, unless you want to replace the entire assembly, which in many cases is not economical, as you're spending a lot more money than what is necessary, and that's assuming the part is even available for your machine. There's a reason why companies like Hoover allow their cyclone assemblies to be easily taken apart with 3 Phillips head screws. And there's a reason why companies like Bissell actually allow the entire cyclone assembly to be taken apart with no tools at all in their budget vacuums. Whereas Dyson is one of those companies that will use a lot of Torx bits and a lot of weird fitting parts in their cyclone assemblies, specifically to make them difficult to repair. And that is not something that is acceptable in an industry like this when you're using an appliance that is expected to get dirty. I like Dyson products. I've been using Dyson products since 2005, and I think that they're very good vacuums. However, that is a complaint that I have with the company, is that as time has gone on, Dyson has made it incredibly more difficult to service their cyclone assemblies. Granted, in the days of the DC-07, DC-14, 15, 17, 18, 25, all that stuff, the cyclone assemblies are very easy to service. And having a Torx bit actually makes sense, because average consumers shouldn't be taking apart their cyclone assembly because they will have issues with washing it out and letting it dry properly. Now, putting oil in your gas tank and then coming to the conclusion that you should never fill up your car is simply not the right conclusion. Just like if you incorrectly wash your cyclone assembly and it molds and it smells bad, doesn't mean that you should have never done it. It means you should have done it correctly. Now, it's understandable why an average consumer who is maybe not wanting to put forth the time to disassemble their machine would maybe not want to do that. And that's why they take it to a professional. Or if they really just want it done, they could also, assuming it's available, just buy the replacement part and swap it out. So it's up to the consumer to do what they want to do with their machine. But at the same time, whenever companies make it deliberately difficult to actually service their machines and their products, whether it's a vacuum cleaner, a car, a cell phone, whatever the case may be, that's an issue that I take severe issue with. Because something like this should be easily serviceable. The fact that I only took out 3 screws and this entire thing is apart, and I'm able to soak this in antibacterial soap overnight, and that tomorrow the smell is going to be gone, that is a good thing. And again, I ran the vacuum without the cyclone assembly, there was no smell. I ran it with the cyclone assembly, and there was a smell. Now the person says, oh, but if there's a smell inside the cyclone, then it doesn't matter because the air isn't going to pass through it. Which is a weird argument, because you're saying that if you have this and you can smell it from here, that's not an issue because the air isn't moving past it. Well, when you have a garbage can in your kitchen, are you not able to smell it just because there's no air moving past the garbage can? Are you only able to smell the scent of your garbage in your kitchen if the ceiling fan in your dining room that's next to your kitchen is turned on? No, of course not. Any odor that is lingering can still be smelled. And if you have some sort of odor, that odor is caused by bacteria. This is something that the person in the video mentioned as being a cause of odor, which is all fine and dandy, but whenever you're discussing the cause of the odor, but not actually giving the proper solution to get rid of the odor, then you're not very helpful, and you're not actually helping people solve their problem. And based on the comments in that video, it seems like people were actually fooled into clicking on the video because he supposedly had the title, How to Clean Out Your Cyclone, which the fact that he said it as that, and yet at the same time told people to not do it, is incredibly gross. Because then you're clickbaiting people into clicking on your video. Whether you have it set up for AdSense or not is irrelevant, but you're baiting people into clicking on your video by advertising falsely what your video is about. And in the case of it being called Never Clean Out Your Dyson Cyclone, well, you're just spreading misinformation. Whenever people ask, hey, how many times have you fixed vacuums? And how can you know for sure that this is an issue? He's like, well, I made a video where I did an experiment, but that experiment doesn't involve any real-world vacuum cleaners. It's just a bunch of theory. It's not actually taking a machine in the wild that needs service and actually doing the service and then proving that somehow the smell wasn't coming from the cyclone assembly. And even if so, that's anecdotal. Well, he also makes the argument that any smell coming from the cyclone assemblies is anecdotal, when it's really not. Because whenever the entire comment section is flooded with repair technicians who say, no, actually, in my experience, these cyclone assemblies can harbor very bad smells over time from normal use, especially if they're advertised as being for pets, then yeah, that's going to happen over time. And the fact that it simply can't be accepted that sometimes cyclone assemblies do get odors, and the only way to get rid of those odors without replacing it and throwing it in the trash is to open it up and properly clean it, properly wash it, properly disinfect it, and properly dry it out and reassemble it. And that is something where there are certain companies that make that more difficult to do than others, including Dyson, especially with their newer kinetic models where the cyclone assemblies are near impossible to properly service. And he also mentions how clogging up of these cyclones only happens under extreme use. That is not true. While it is more likely to happen under extreme use, it can happen under normal use as well. Again, this machine is only a couple years old. A couple years of normal use, and the owner took very good care of the machine. There's no dents, there's no scratches, the brush roll is clean, the belt is working, there's no clogs in the machine, and the machine has all the attachments. Were it not for the moisture that is in this bin, you would swear it was just taken out of the box. But the only issue is the smell coming from the bin because of the odors. However the odors got there is irrelevant. You need to eradicate those odors if you're going to fix it and give it back to the customer. Or if you're actually getting a vacuum from someone to fix and resell yourself, then again, you don't want to sell a machine that has an odor with it, because obviously that would not be pleasant for the end user while they're using the vacuum cleaner. Or even if they're not using the vacuum cleaner and they just notice a smell when they take it apart, because again, those odors can still linger. I had a Dyson DC07, an original DC07 from 2002. I live in the US, so DC07s were released here about that year, and Dysons were brand new to the US market. I just serviced one that was 18 years old, and the vacuum still works, but it had a lack of suction. After cleaning out the entire cyclone assembly, and the filters weren't that dirty, so that definitely wasn't a problem. And, in case you say that maybe I didn't know for sure, I put new filters in it, and it had the same problems, and there were no clogs in the machine. So the only thing left to cause the loss of suction was the cyclone assembly. And if you see the video, which I haven't uploaded yet, but if you happen to see the video, you'll see the mountains of dust that was clogged from the bottom of the cyclone assembly all the way to the top of where the root cyclones exit the top of the cyclone. And the DC07 is a very, very tall cyclone assembly. So that entire section was completely plugged with dust, and that affects the performance. You can say that, oh, that's in the discharge chamber, so that doesn't count. Wrong. Because once it gets up to the point where it builds up to where the cyclones end, then the dust has nowhere to go but to clog the cyclones, and that will reduce the performance, reduce the suction, and ultimately make the vacuum not work until you service that cyclone assembly. Granted, that's over 18 years, so that's an extended period of time, but your video was not titled, Rarely You Should Clean Out Your Dyson Cyclones, or in your video wasn't titled, You Probably Don't Have to Clean Out Your Dyson Cyclones, because those would both be correct. You specifically titled it, Never Clean Out Your Dyson Cyclones, Never Clean Out Your Cyclone Assembly, which is simply false and not true. And you can't make the argument, you can't backtrack your arguments and then get mad at people for talking about the fact that you obviously clickbaited the video if you're not making the conclusion that your title suggests. So anyways, let's clean out the rest of this thing and see how it goes. Now, one thing I will say is that the part that person mentioned in their video about how one of the ways that it's dangerous to clean out a cyclone assembly unnecessarily is that if it doesn't dry out properly, the water can pool, and as a result, whenever you turn the vacuum back on, it can suck that water into the motor and cause damage. That is indeed true. If you don't clean out your cyclone assembly properly, you don't dry it out properly, then you may in fact damage your vacuum. But that's also like how if you don't install your brush correctly, you could damage your vacuum. Or if you don't install your hose correctly, your vacuum may not work right. So it's not necessarily about that, but the point does still stand. If you suck water into the motor of your vacuum, you may break it. And that definitely would not be a good thing if your attempt was to fix your vacuum cleaner by cleaning out the cyclone assembly. So it's very simple. Just whenever you go to disassemble your vacuum cleaner, make sure you're doing it properly and know your limits. If you feel that disassembling your cyclone assembly is too much for you to do, know your limits and reach out to someone who's actually an expert and who has had experience with cleaning out these things and taking vacuums apart. Or, like I said before, if you are able to just replace the cyclone assembly yourself and you're sure that that's the issue, then by all means go ahead. And then you'll be able to easily solve your issue. And the cost of buying a replacement part was perhaps worth the lack of having to actually put time aside to do it and make sure that you do it properly. And of course, you could always just take it to any local vacuum store or to any local repair person that you know, and they'll be happy to do it for you, assuming they provide that sort of repair. And of course, obviously, if your machine is not suffering from any sort of performance issues, then yeah, don't clean out your cyclone assembly. Because if your goal is to simply fix any issue that your vacuum has, then you wouldn't have really fixed that goal. And if you're not a refurbisher, then you're not really concerned with how the vacuum looks on the inside of it. You're just concerned with how it works. So yeah, in that scenario where your vacuum is working fine, or it has an issue that isn't related to the cyclone assembly, and there's no smells coming from your cyclone assembly, or no other incentive to actually pull it apart and clean it, then don't clean it, and just leave it the way it is. And then once you have an issue, then you can discuss whether or not you want to actually clean out your cyclone assembly yourself, or take it to a professional. So it's really that simple. It's not a matter of any sort of scientific supposed research. It's not a matter of making any elaborate experiments to supposedly prove how cyclones apparently clean themselves. They don't. That's why Dyson had to actually invent a system that supposedly cleans the cyclones themselves with the Dyson Kinetic system. So that point about cyclones cleaning themselves is simply not true. There have been many scenarios where cyclones, especially in Dyson machines and in other multi-cyclonic machines, have gotten clogged from average use. And even if they were clogged from abuse, sure, they were clogged from abuse, but that doesn't exactly address how you go about fixing the problem. You've identified the problem, but how do you actually go about fixing it? Well, you have to clean out the cyclone assembly. You have to completely disassemble it, wash all the parts, allow it to dry properly, which in most cases, if you're actually setting it out to air dry inside your house, should be at least about a week. If you're really concerned about the water getting in little nooks and crannies, wipe it off with a towel first. Again, wipe off all the parts. Don't wash the cyclone assembly when it's not taken apart because water can get in crevices and not dry out properly. But if you do take it apart correctly, make sure that you wipe it off with a towel and still allow it to sit out for about a week. If you desperately need a vacuum, use a different vacuum. Don't do what this person did and run it with water inside the cyclone assembly, because that could ultimately damage your vacuum, or at the very least, make a very unpleasant smell, especially if you have pets. So anyways, to conclude this video, in most scenarios where your vacuum is working properly and you're not experiencing any issues, don't clean out your cyclone assembly. But if your vacuum is having issues and you've determined via trial and error that the actual issue is the cyclone assembly, then go ahead. If you are able to have the technical skills to pull it apart properly and put it back together properly, and you know what you're doing, go ahead and clean it out. If you don't know what you're doing, then go ahead and take it to your local professional who is able to actually take it apart properly, clean it out properly, and fix it up for you. So that way your vacuum works just fine and you don't have any issues with it. So anyways, that was just a quick video just reminding people that yes, there are some scenarios where you would want to clean out the cyclone assembly on your vacuum, especially if it's a machine like this, where you can very easily take it apart and clean it out yourself. Again, as long as you let it dry properly, don't leave any residual soap, and make sure that it is thoroughly washed, cleaned, and afterwards sanitized, then any smell that you had, any odor that you had, should be eradicated. So anyways, this is Intelitech Studios signing out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Hopefully you found this video helpful, and hopefully you enjoyed it. Now, if you'd like, I could do an actual tutorial on how to clean out the cyclone assembly, if you'd like to see that in a separate video, if you are in a position where you want to clean it out yourself. So again, this is Intelitech Studios signing out, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a good one.